Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I think it's the time we should get started. Meanwhile, people will keep on joining. So, I welcome you all to the masterclass series by Pragmatic Leaders. The today's topic for masterclass is Data Product Management 101. We are so glad to see you all here. So, before we start today's session, I'd like to give you all a brief about Pragmatic Leaders. We built Pragmatic Leaders as a bridge for mid career technology professionals to confidently change roles or careers. At Pragmatic Leaders, you're a part of a global family of aspirational professionals who proactively help each other and are invested in each other's career growth. At Pragmatic Leaders, you're a part of a global family of professionals who proactively help each other and are invested in each other's career growth. We offer the pay after placement program in product management, which is completely online and case study based. Um, and with 79% placement rate, our students are placed as product managers at brands like Walmart, PayPal, Paytm, Amazon, Limeroad, and other reputed brands with an average 50% salary hike. For more details, you can visit our website, that is www.pragmaticleaders.io, or you can also reach out to me afterwards. Uh, our speakers for today's session are experienced product leaders who bring in 10 to 15 years of experience. So today we have with us Rishit Jain, Principal Product Manager at Tata 1MG, Ishant Kathuria, Senior Product Manager at Airtel Labs, Sharat Babu, Product Manager at Paysend, and Shautrik Jordar, Product Manager at Zycus. So we welcome you all, and we are really excited to have you all as speakers with us tonight. So before we get started, I would like to introduce some housekeeping rules here. If you have any questions during the sessions, please type them in the chat box, and you can also raise your hands to ask your questions directly. And we'll also have a Q&A session at the very end, where all our four speakers will be participating to answer your questions. So with that note, let's begin the masterclass with the first session, that is data PM versus platform PM versus growth PM. Uh, so we have our speaker with us, Rishit Jain. Hi, Rishit, how are you?
Hi Priyanka, doing very well, thank you.
Yeah, so Rishit is a full stack product manager. He has experience in creating full long-term strategy to crisp hand-on execution. He has built products from concept to launch for uh, disruptive startups and global enterprises. Previously, he has worked with Delivery, Hitachi, and Boeing in the product space. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over the session to Rishit. Please introduce yourself and let's get started.
Sure, thank you Priyanka, thank you so much for the introduction. I think you've done justice to the introduction, so I'll just get started with the session. Uh, so let me try and share my screen. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Priyanka, I think I have to give system permissions to share my screen. Okay, this is done. Let me try again.
Um, Rishit, do you want me to share the screen? Maybe can you share? Hello.
Okay. Priyanka, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it is.
And you're able to see the first slide, right?
Yes, we are.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Priyanka. So I'll start. As Priyanka mentioned, this is a data product management 101, and I'll be talking about the differences between a data PM, growth PM, and a platform PM. And before I start, I just like to set the agenda where I like this line. If you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it well enough, right? And that's the takeaways that I have from this session today, where it's a success for me and the people on the call if we are able to achieve these three things and not three. Even if we are able to achieve the first two, I think it will be partially successful. Where we'll be able to understand and articulate the difference between a data PM, growth PM, and platform PM. Whenever you look at a product or feature next, and that product and feature can be across any domain, intuitively we should be able to identify the underlying data, platform, and growth components. And the North Star, I think for me would be if after this session we are able to explain point number one to a 6-year-old using an example, right? And that example can be anything that that person uses, be it from a digital world or a physical world. So let's get started. And since I'm the first speaker, I thought I'll just do a product management 101 refresher before delving deep into the differences between a data PM, growth PM, and a platform PM. So this is how I define it. Simply, I think there's some background noise. Priyanka, can you put other participants on mute, please?
Yeah, I just did.
Sure, thank you. So product management for me is all about solving a user problem. And then when you talk about a user problem, right, it can be anything reaching from point A to point B, the likes of Uber, Ola, or the likes of a Indigo Airlines or a Go Air. At the end of the day, they are helping users reach from point A to point B. Feeling hungry, Domino's, Zomato, Swiggy. Staying fit, a gym across the road, Cult Fit, or you want to diagnose diseases, order medicines, 1 mg, right? Now, when you do that, once you have identified a problem, who is the user you are trying to solve that problem for? Is it a B2B user, a B2C user? Are these internal operations users, sales, marketing, accounting? Are these developers? Think of them developers using Postman API as a product. And within all of these, you can further subdivide them into different cohorts, segments, personas, and different jobs that these users do. And then we come to solving, right? And to solve, once you've identified a problem, once you've identified the users for which you want to solve these problems, you use technology, business and operational processes, product and user experience design, analytics, data science, experiment over those solutions, iterate, and then come to a solution where you're trying to find a product market fit. Right. So let's keep this broad level framework in mind, because when we go to the different types of PMs, then there will be very slight differences in where these PMs operate in these three spaces. right? And from a mental model perspective, we always start from a problem, then to a user, and then try solving it. If we have not identified the right problem, no matter how elegant the solution is, we'll end up failing, right? We'll not be able to solve for the user, neither will be able to create a viable business model. Now jumping on, right? So let's take an example before we come to summarizing or I talking about a lot of theory. Uh, so I want you guys to have a look at this page. Um, this is the homepage of Tata 1MG, right? And you open any app as of today, you'll have a homepage. Now, my question to you is, and people in the audience can type their answers. Somebody wants to unmute and say something, you can go ahead and do that. Is it just a page or is it a manifestation of a platform? So I'll pause for about 10 seconds in case there's someone who's trying to answer this question. I'll look at the chat window. Okay, I don't have any responses yet. I'll move forward. So,
It's a manifestation.
sure, thank you. Who was that? Nilesh.
Amir.
Amir, Nilesh. Sure, thank you. Uh, you're right, Amir and Nilesh. Right, it is a manifestation, uh, but it's also a page, right? Let's say today we have a home page where we have as an entry point, it has medicines, it has lab tests, it has doctor consultation. But tomorrow, if let's say 1MG wants to get into vaccination, or if there's a new wave of COVID that comes up, I hope that doesn't. Then what the users will come on this homepage would want to have an icon that helps them get an RT-PCR test, right? Or that helps them get a COVID vaccination, for example. But if we would have to do that, either you as a product manager who's looking at growth for RT-PCR or COVID, they work with this technology team, have a new widget built in, and then launch, which might take anywhere between 7 days, a sprint, or a month, and you've already lost a lot of time. However, if you build this page as a platform which has reusable components, which can be, let's say, these tiles, instead of these 2 by 4 tiles, you can have 2 by 2 tiles. You can have a video here. Instead of linking it to medicines, you can have a link to a vaccination page, to a RT-PCR page. Then there's an underlying platform that a PM can use to configure all of this, and hardly it will then take about 2 hours or 4 hours once you've taken a decision to make these changes. So again, going back to our product management 101, what problem is it solving? If you look at it as a platform, it's solving the problem of faster time to market for any changes that needs to be done. However, if you look at this page as a page that drives conversion from the top of the funnel, a page that helps increase transactions or increase traffics on specific sections, then it's problem solving the problem of growth. Now, if you look at this page from a perspective of can I personalize this page and based on historical behavior of a person, whether they've taken medicines for a chronic disease or an acute disease, or let's say Ayurveda products versus homeopathy products, you can look at this page as a data product problem where can you showcase relevant content and relevant widgets on this page. Uh, for this specific example, which is the first page that we have, I'll consider this as a platform, and it's solving the problem of faster time to delivery. Who are the users? The users can be sales, the users can be category, the users can be a growth PM, the user can be a data PM, right? And there can be times where, let's say, you don't have a widget available, then the trade-off that the platform PM would have to take, whether you build that widget at the platform level, which can then be reusable across multiple verticals, or you build that at a vertical level, at a growth level, then possibly only a pharmacy medicines PM would be able to use it. If in future a labs, a diagnostics, or a doctor consultation PM needs to use the same feature, they'll have to build it all over again. So this is one example. We'll move to the second one, which is, and I'm not pausing for questions. In case you have any questions, feel free to write them on the chat. We have dedicated time at the end for any questions. Uh, Now let's move on to the second example, right? So on the same page, we see these two widgets. One banner is showcasing that you can get an HbA1c test for rupees 299 only. Another one is showcasing 40% off on Ayurveda supplements. Now the question I'll ask is, why only HbA1c test, right? Why not a full body checkup? Or why not a thyroid profile? Why not a lipid profile? Or why not an RT-PCR? Right? So if you have to personalize this based on, again, who the user is, which city the user is from, historically, what kind of transactions have they done? What is the source that they've come on this platform from? uh, and then create a model which dynamically changes these banners and upsell. Then you look at it and you say, what problem is it solving? It's solving a personalization problem where a user lands on the page and they get something that they have an intent for, right? However, it's difficult to figure out an intent. On the other hand, if a data PM is able to recommend this with a high degree of accuracy, it's also solving a growth problem because the conversion rates and the click-through rates on these banners will increase. Now, as those click-through rates increase, your transactions will increase. Okay, what problem is it solving? Let's say solving a data product problem where you are able to personalize these pages based on historical behavior. Why is the problem important to be solved? Again, user satisfaction, customer experience, higher transaction rates, higher click-through rates, high conversion. Who are the users? In this case, you have your typical B2C users, somebody who's coming to the platform to buy a medicine, to get a health checkup done, to order OTC products, and you can further classify it based on their demographics and personas. How the problem is being solved? Again, in this case, the problem is being solved through a personalization engine or through a recommendation model. Now, if we go to the last part, right, when we say what does a growth PM does, even in the previous two, we did touch upon this growth that is getting driven. But specifically, a growth PM would look at user behavior, would look at intrinsic motivations of the user, and try to nudge the user towards a specific action, right? Now, when I say a specific action, let's take an example of the pricing widget here. So you have a normal MRP and you have another price available, which is much lesser than the MRP. And it says free shipping and some cashback with care plan, and then it's trying to explain something. Now, the underlying motivation that the growth PM is trying to drive is people or the users are sensitive to price. And if I give them a lower price, it's highly likely that they'll opt in for a lower price. And then, uh, as a PM who takes care of growth for the care plan, which is a subscription program, this becomes very important because what they've now tried to give here is an intuitive comparison and a nudge for the user to click. Typical metrics that the growth PMs would look at is funnel optimization, transactions, revenue numbers, ARRs, which is annual recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue, engagement on the platform. Right now, what problem is it solving? If you look at the end user, for the end user, it's solving a problem of price. I get the same offering at a lesser price with a membership. If you look at from an organization perspective, it's solving the problem of loyalty. It's solving the problem of having more people opt in for your premium membership, something similar to, let's say, an Amazon Prime. Who are the users? Again, the user set in this case remains the same, which are B2C users who have a need for medicine. And they are discount seeking users or sensitive to price. And how the problem is being solved? It's being solved through user nudges and over a period of time to come up with this nudge and then identify whether something like this would have worked or not. You run an experiment and you do an A/B test where you say, okay, I have a version without this price, I have a version with this price. I have bifurcated both my users, multiple users, uh, into two different cohorts, and which cohort is performing better. And maybe then your cohort one is not, or your experiment set is not performing as you would have expected, your hypothesis failed. Then as a growth PM, you go back to the drawing board and take a call whether the hypothesis was wrong, right? This comparison the user doesn't care about, or the design of the experiment was wrong. Maybe this is confusing for the user and then the user is not clicking on it, or maybe the information isn't enough. And then you iterate and keep on experimenting. Uh, so I took these three examples. All of these three examples involve all the three components of a data PM, platform PM, and a growth PM. Even if you look at this pricing widget, for me to do rapid experimentation, there has to be a pricing mechanism, a platform which helps me experiment with this quickly, right? If tomorrow I want to include competitor pricing also in this, I cannot again go back to the development team and ask for doing that. So having a platform helps. It's helping again a growth problem where I'm able to have higher conversions on this membership. And then from a data perspective, if I have an ability to customize these prices on a dynamic basis based on users' propensity to buy a product, users' location, users' historical transactions, and the kind of medicines that they bought. In medicine's case, this might not be applicable because there are regulations available. But if you look at an Ola, Uber, or an Amazon or a Flipkart, um, their dynamic pricing really works, right? So that is where the data science models come in. So if we have to then extend these examples into uh, generic things that a growth PM, a platform PM, or a data PM would look at on a day-to-day basis, right? So it's not a versus. There is high overlap, but still, if you have to define key things or key focus that a growth PM would look at, or they'll be responsible for in an organization, right? So they'll focus on business metrics, revenue, user growth, metrics like annual recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue, daily average users, monthly average users, funnel optimization. What that means is, let's say somebody lands on the home page. What percentage of those people click a widget and then go to the next page, let's say the product description page? What percentage of those people then again add to cart? What percentage of those people again from add to cart to uh, go to the cart and click on the payment page or proceed to buy, and then how many actually make a transaction? Uh, Growth PMs typically do rapid experimentation, a lot of experimentation. Do you have a button say add to cart, or do you have a button which says buy now? How does a user react to it? Do you design a button with, let's say, a red color on it or a green color on it? These are very simplistic examples. One of the examples of design that we looked at was the pricing widget as well, which is slightly more complicated. But they'll do lots and lots of experimentations and lots and lots of A/B tests to understand what works for the users and what does not. Right? And they use a lot of data to do it, but then that does not mean that they fall into the category of a data PM, which is slightly different. Uh, a lot of user research and customer insights gets generated. Some of this customer insight is used for driving growth. Some of this customer insight is actually used to create new features, and this may translate to a platform PM or a data PM. And there is quite a lot of overlap with product marketing here in the growth side. Um, Coming to the platform PM part, a platform PM would typically think in abstract entities and their properties, right? So now going back to the example of the homepage. If I have to develop homepage as a growth PM, I might look at what is the user behavior as of today and how can I optimize people clicking on certain elements of the homepage. However, when a platform PM thinks about the same problem, they'll think about, I have these three verticals. I have a pharmacy vertical, I have a doctor consultation vertical, I have then a diagnostics vertical. What are the different components that these verticals can require in the future, right? They might require a banner space on the homepage. They might require, let's say, a bottom sticky. They might require a bottom navigation. The bottom navigation might have at any given point in time 3 entities or 5 entities, right? And whenever these changes would need to be done, there should be a no-code mechanism to do it. Right? Now think of typical SaaS platforms. Think of an Oracle ERP. Think of an SAP. Think of Zoho. So when they go to a client and they say, we have this product, why don't you integrate? It's not custom development. It's mostly configurations. It's API integration, right? And then these platform PMs have to be holistic in their thinking in the system design that they do, because all use cases, or at least 80-90% of the use cases, have to be covered, and the systems need to be configurable. If they are not, you'll miss a use case. Then you'll have to go back to the drawing board again and have to ship out things which again might need a quarter, and then you've already lost a lot of time to market. So you don't want to build something, the same component again and again in again a pharmacy vertical, a diagnostics vertical, and a consultation vertical. Uh, Inherent cross-functional thinking is needed, and it enables organizations, whether internal or external. So a lot of work that is being done by a platform PM is then used by a growth PM or a data PM. Think of it as Lego blocks, where a platform PM decides what kind of Lego blocks need to be built, and then a growth PM can pick and choose those blocks and drive these metrics, and the data PM can try and pick and choose those other blocks and drive their own metrics. Uh, Coming to the data PM part, there is a lot of overlap in the skill set, but the unique point here is a data PM would typically deal with probabilistic outputs. So at the end of the day, you're predicting something, right? Again, if you are recommending a product, a lab test, you're predicting based on certain signals, and that prediction may or may not be correct, right? You're trying to understand users' intent. Some other examples. So this is personalization, both from a UX perspective, from a recommendation perspective. There's a lot of optimization that gets done in, for example, logistics domain or airlines, where you're trying to ascertain, given an input set or given a load distribution, what is the best way to service that load. Machine learning, again, the same example. Uh, I've done 10 transactions of a particular average order value. Based on that, can I learn user behavior and recommend the next product to that particular user? Or based on the data collected from my Android device, can I identify on a map whether it's a road, a railway station, or a river that's flowing through? Artificial intelligence, think of it as this, right? If you've trained a machine learning model on a lot of data, let's say data of cats and dogs, tomorrow if a fox comes in, can we build something that's intelligent enough to identify that as an animal at least, even if I've not seen that data previously? Computer vision, again, X-ray images, am I able to identify X-ray images and give a diagnosis of what the disease can be? And the tricky part in all of this is the precision, the recall, the data quality, and the feedback loops. And what that means is, in the 100 cases that I'm trying to predict, what is the accuracy of my prediction? That's precision. That is what a data PM really, one of the core metrics that this person works with the team. Recall, what this means again is if 100 cases are presented for prediction, how many cases am I able to predict? Right? There can be cases where the algorithm is not even able to predict anything, whether right or wrong. Data quality, you're collecting a lot of data. How do you remove noise? How do you make sure the data that you're collecting is good enough to actually build a model on top? And how can you build feedback loops so that your models, all of this, keeps improving day in and day out? So all of these things is something that a data PM looks at. There are overlaps. So let's say an overlap of a platform PM and a growth PM would build something such as a growth platform or an A/B testing platform, or a platform that helps you run sales and campaigns, right? So you need skills from both sides. Uh, a data PM and a platform PM would typically build something like a data platform where you have a central platform which gives you customer insights. And then, again, coming back to the healthcare example, a pharmacy PM can use the same customer insight in a different way, whereas a diagnostics PM can use the same customer insight in a different way. Both of them would not have to write business logics to create the same insights from data, and you have this platform which is available. This gets used a lot on gaming devices and gaming platforms where you have a customer 360, and across different games, these PMs are able to leverage this. And then the overlap between a data PM and a growth PM would be something like a personalization led growth, which is a very, very common example around recommended buys. And if you look at all of this three, how they all come together is to build an ecosystem, an entire company, so to say, or a homepage example, so to say, where a growth PM drives conversion, a data PM gives recommendations, and a platform PM has built the building blocks on which the homepage was created. So this was more of a summary view through the example, and that's all I had for the session. But would happy to take any questions that the audience may have.
What do you think is the future?
Uh, the future is you need to build companies that will use all three, right? So all three will continue to exist, and all three will keep on adding value. There will be new ways and innovations in all three aspects. So I don't think there's one future. If you ask me, it's not the future; it's already the present. The platform way, almost all the companies that have reached a certain scale are going the platform way, because it doesn't really make sense to build something again and again as you expand horizontally and launch different businesses. If there are common capabilities that are to be leveraged, platforms is something that companies build. This is comparatively new, hasn't really been done a lot, but it's not the future, it's the present. Similarly, data product is still in its infancy. You need a lot of understanding of data science to get into a data product role. And the primary difference is when you look at a platform PM or a growth PM, there's a lot of certainty involved. Think of it as a nested if-else statement and business rules that you're building. A data PM will not be able to build business rules because you don't really know whether the output is correct or not. So this is a new and emerging field. Think of likes of Facebook, think of Grammarly, for example, based on whatever you're typing on the platform. There are times where it will autocorrect, and there are times where it will only give a recommendation. It will autocorrect when the confidence on the prediction is very high. It will give a recommendation when the confidence on the prediction is less. Growth, again, right? No company can work without growth. Every company needs revenue at the end of the day, more and more users. Uh, so I don't think there's one answer in terms of what's the future. Growth is something that has been, growth PM roles have been there for some time. Platform PM roles have been there in large organizations, is picking up in startups as well. Data PM is a more specialized role, but this is also picking up quite fast. It will take some more time to really come in the mainstream. Not all companies have a data PM role and specialization, but if you look at, let's say, 10, 20 years down the line, even 7, 8 years down the line, there will be a lot of requirement for data PMs.
Hey, Rishit. Can you tell me how would you go about architecting the whole data side of the product management for your company? For example, if there's a company who's in its early stage and the products are getting built, various sort of products, internal, customer centric, etc. And we want to drive the whole paradigm using data. How do you sort of architect the whole thing? How do you go about it? Need inputs from your side.
Uh, sure, Taki, right. That's a good question. I think I'll go back to the basics of product where I'll have to define what the problem is, right? If it's a new company, still trying to figure out a product market fit, I don't think there's a need for a data product manager, right? What you would want to do is build robust pipelines to keep collecting data. Don't think that any data is not useful. Just keep collecting them, build a data warehouse over a period of time, democratize data. And once you reach a certain scale, then it's very important to understand what problems are you solving for, right? I'll take a couple of examples to elaborate, right? So we have a system for prescription validation, right? You upload a doctor's prescription, and all of us know how good the handwriting of doctors are on those prescriptions. And there's a machine learning model that reads those prescriptions and converts it into the specific medicines that have been prescribed and directly adds it to the cart. Now, that the rendering of that particular recommendation or that particular prediction has to be in real time, because as soon as you upload a prescription, we cannot give you a bad experience where you're waiting for 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Right? So you architect that in a very different way, right? As compared to something that can be run on batch, something like um, something like defining your cohorts. So you take millions of users, look at their historical behavior, define let's say 10 cohorts, and based on those 10 cohorts, you see 10 different home pages or 10 different user journeys, right? So that is more of a one-time job. You can have higher latency, you can have, let's say, lesser server costs, architect it in a different way. And for something like a prescription validation, your model should really work in almost real time. So you architect that in a different way. Overall, I am a big fan of democratizing of data. So any team that needs to use it should be able to have access to it. So a data platform in that sense is more of a data warehouse which has views built on top of it, which different teams can use.
Hey Rishit, my question was actually I had an assumption that data PM would like a company should have a certain stage to actually have a data PM because you would need enough data to make that prediction. So I just wanted to validate that if that's correct, or there are like some early stage startup would be looking for data PM. Thank
Sure, I think broadly your assumption is correct. Uh, so there are three aspects to it. The first aspect is there should always be a data mindset. So let's say you have a mobile app. That mobile app is being used by let's say your field operations staff. And typically, when these are internal applications, you don't really worry about collecting data, right? And if you are in that kind of organization, you should actually build a case for start collecting that data so that in futures, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, you should be able to draw some insights out of it. There are a lot of companies that do that mistake. For that, you do not really need a data PM. You just need that mindset that data is important and valuable. The second aspect is uh, there are companies which are AI first. What I mean is, let's say there's a company who's trying to parse CVs and resumes of candidates and match them to relevant job descriptions. So those companies would require they might hire a PM without a data product designation, but those companies typically require a skill set that a data product manager needs. And then the third aspect finally is that you are at a stage where you get a data PM, but you don't really know what problems they need to solve, or you are not really, for you, data science or a data product is a black box and you have unrealistic expectations. Even then, a data product manager role kind of will fail, right? So overall, yes, you are right. Unless you have a lot of data, you don't need a data product PM, data PM, so to say. But there should be mindset, and there should be some person in the organization that's driving that mindset. You may call it data PM, you may call it someone else, but that's absolutely necessary.
Got it. Just prolonging your answer in some aspect, you told about recording the data. So how do you like make sure, like how do you understand what kind of data should we be recording at this given stage, or is it like record everything, whatever you can?
Uh, I think broadly, it's very difficult to predict the kind of problems you'll be able to solve in the future, right? So as long as the cost associated with recording data is not huge, and that cost has gone down exponentially over the past decade or so with AWS, with Azure, with GCP. So my recommendation would be to record everything that you can. Right? You can have it in a low-cost storage, which is not easily accessible, but yeah, you should record all of your consumer data, all of your transactions data. You might choose not to record uh, low value data, let's say a lot of user clicks that might not be relevant 3 years down the line, but all transactions and all user behavior demographics data should be recorded.
Got it. Thanks.
What is the difference between product analyst and data PM?
Also, Dipesh, a product analyst would would do a lot of number crunching for you, right? They might do instrumentation, they might set up your Google Analytics, they might uh, create rudder events, they might help you in estimating the impact of a feature that you'll release. They'll work very closely with the PM. A product analyst typically works very closely with a growth PM and a data PM. A data PM, there's no requirement for a data PM not to get into data and do all of that himself or herself. But for a data PM, it's important to uh, create the requirements, the guardrails, and the vision for the product. Now I'll give you an example, right, for that. So let's say you're building a recommendation system. You can not just go and tell your data scientist that I want to build a recommendation system. You have to provide certain guardrails in terms of I want to give a separate recommendation for a senior citizen. I want to give another recommendation for, let's say, somebody who's a youngster. I want to optimize for average order values versus I want to optimize for cart drop-offs. And once you run these experiments, you have, and there will be no experiment that gives you success on all the metrics that you are trying to achieve, right? So there will always be a trade-off. Then a data PM would actually go back and look at the experiment results and take a call in terms of whether the experiment was successful or not, or where to draw the line. There will always be a trade-off between precision and recall. So if I want to build something that predicts how many marks will I get in the next test, my model can very well say you'll get anywhere between 0 marks to 100 marks, and I will always be 100% accurate, right? Because it's the entire range. My precision will be 100%. But if I want to say, okay, you'll get between 70 to 80 marks, my precision will go down. If you want to say I'll get 78 marks, my precision will go down further, right? So what's the right guardrail for a specific business use case is something that a data PM looks at, builds a use case, business case for it, creates human in the loop processes to operationalize those products, right? Similar case, let's say in healthcare, if you are predicting a disease, the cost of a wrong prediction is high. The cost of when let's say you do not have a disease, the model predicts that you have a disease, right? How do you handle such cases? How do you build a product flow for that? Or you have a disease, but the model does not predict that you have a disease, right? How do you take care of all of those things? So all of that product flow, all of that product design is something that a data PM does, where a product analyst would be more in terms of assisting the PM, and they'll have their own insights. They'll dig deep into data and find patterns. They'll identify what are the areas where there are areas of improvement. And a product analyst has that career path where they can either go into senior product analyst, business intelligence, data science core, or they can transition into a product management role.
Hey Rishit, sorry, one more question. And I'm keeping it very open-ended, but we know that every company has at least sales, ops, tech, and marketing, right?
Sure.
Almost every company.
Yeah.
So what tools have you used or you recommend others using for us to optimize these processes inside operation, all these departments?
So Takir, I think that's very, very open-ended, right? When you say these processes, which processes are you referring to? The interaction between these functions and the product team, or are you referring to a specific process?
I'm talking about how sales operates, how sales would interact with the customer, how marketing interacts with the customer, how ops interacts with the customer, not with each other.
Right. I think there are tools available in the market, right, for sending out push notifications, for example, for marketing, right? You have something like called an app Annie, which gives you a benchmarking of how your app is performing as compared to competitors again. You can use your Twitter feeds to understand customer sentiment, apply a layer of NLP. Right. But what in a generic sense, what I can say is whatever processes, whatever tools that you have, it's very important to have processes so that you can collect all of that data and uh, assimilate that in a repository, and every month or every quarter you sit with your product team and discuss the feedback that you've received, or the kind of voice of customer, as we say it, is there, and that voice of customer can go back into the product roadmap. From a product perspective, there are tools like Mixpanel, Hotjar that help you record user sessions, that help you look at heat maps, that help you do A/B testing quickly. So you don't have to build everything in house. You can just use a SaaS player that's already there. I'm not sure, Taki, whether that answered your question completely or not, but I think that's from a product perspective that's how I look at it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rishit and Takwir. So we'll now move to the second session of the masterclass. So we have with us Ishan Katuria, Senior Product Manager at Airtel Labs. So he'll be speaking on the topic data-driven decisions are the future of product management. Previously, he was working with Geo as a data PM, and he brings in 7 years of work experience in product management. Hey, Ishan, can you hear me?
Hi, Priyanka. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Rishit, for the wonderful session. It was really insightful. And thank you, everyone for joining in on a Saturday evening. Right, this is really good. I'll be sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yes.
Awesome. So this will be the agenda. We'll be talking about few live success stories, few examples, few brands who have proved that data is not the future, but they have been leveraging data day in, day out. Right? What is data-driven product management? Why is it critical for every org, every product manager? How is it done? What are the ways to do it? Of course, analytics. Any data-driven product management cannot go without analytics. Some part of it is already covered. It was already covered in the research session. We would like to go slightly deep into it, and the skill sets required. Right? What do we need to go there? Right? The list will not be exhaustive. right? But some soft skills along with some technical, which will help you transition from early PM to a data-driven PM, right? To start with, I'll be covering two brands, right? First will be Google, right? And I'll be referring to Google AdWords specifically. I'm sure all of us must have seen Google Ads. Whenever we search something, we have used Google extensively, right? So just to tell you a small story, this product, right, Google AdWords, it was almost getting shelved, right? The founders were convinced, but the Google sales team was not very well convinced because they were scared that this might eat away their job if you try to place the ads automated fashion without selling the digital property which we refer, right? It was almost getting shelled. And then the product manager, right, Jane was the product manager. She was, although she was working as a part-time PM back then, but accidentally she discovered she had to convince everyone, and that's how it landed. That she had to meet engineers, she had to meet Google sales team, she had to talk to different stakeholders to ensure that how is it different from the ads which are placed at the top when you search something, right? So Google AdSense or AdWords, you might have seen ads on the right side, whereas the sales ads, they come at the top. Now, this product, why are we talking about this product is because this is mainly responsible for around 85% of Google's revenue today, right? Any guesses on the revenue we're talking about? Anyone? Wild guess? The product which was almost getting shelved today generates around $147 billion. It's not million, it's $1 billion, right? Now, what is so special about it, right? So instead of determining the ad placement solely based on the price, what Google did was they used a formula that multiplied the price paid per impression, right, with the ads performance. So even though some brands might be paying very high price, but if people are not clicking, then the ad subsequently goes down. I think the same algorithm they use in the search results as well. Now this brought up the relevant ads, which again brought traffic. This brought relevancy, and this made Google more credible because they were showing the right ads, which was relevant to the customer, right? Which was not just not the brand which was just paying the highest, right? This is a very simple example of how AdWords product manager leverage data to understand what works, what doesn't, right? Now, this, of course, clearly differentiated between the sales team and ensured quality search results, right? Not just the ads which paid the highest. All right, moving on. Next example is, again, I'm sure everybody has used, almost at least most of us have used Facebook, right? After Google, I think this is the only company which has the highest amount of data, our data, right from photos to locations to how do we look at it tags us, what do we like, what we do not, right? Our friend circles, places we have been, right? Likes, dislikes I've covered, right? So what is so special about Facebook? How much data it generates, right? Since we're talking about data, right? Every 60 seconds, it generates around 136,000 photos, right? It has 510K comments and 293K status updates, right? Every 60 seconds. Now, every 60 seconds, we talk about gazillion of data being uploaded, people sharing photos, videos, check-ins, right? And whatnot, right? So what does it do, right? Now, this particular product, right, Facebook, it tracks it determines user behaviors. How does it do it, right? Mainly, I'll divide into three parts. One is it tracks cookies, right? So whenever you're logged into Facebook, you are enabling Facebook to capture what are you doing parallelly, right? Whether you're browsing, whether you're or doing XYZ, you are searching for something, you're planning a holiday. You might have seen also, right? You have, suppose you've logged into Facebook, or you have even closed the browser. But what happens is, if you try to search something on Make My Trip or Google, the next time when you go back to Facebook, you might see all the ads, right, on your wall, right? That's what it does. It tracks your likes, dislikes, your behavior, right? Now, a recent study conducted by researchers say the Facebook has so much of data. Researchers at Cambridge University, sorry, it generates so much of data. It has so much of your data that your likes can actually predict your sexual orientation, your satisfaction with life, intelligence, emotional stability, religion, gender, and whatnot. Can you believe that? Right, every time there is some event, Facebook changes its avatar, it brings new photo frames, and then it predicts, all right, it notices who all are using what, and then it stores, right? And it stores indefinitely for now. Like Rishit mentioned, the storing of data has exponentially gone down, right? You might have seen your 10-year memories, 5-year memories. How do you think Facebook is bringing and storing all of it, right? Facial recognition, of course, you might have seen their image processing. Every time you upload a photo, it tries to tag it itself, right? You don't have to tag people. That's how you tell Facebook where you are going, where are you currently. You share the location, what do you like, what do you not, what you don't, right? So this is a very simple, and of course, right, it evolves basis your likes, dislikes, people's post you like, you end up seeing their post time and again, right? Suppose you have 1,000 friends, you do not see updates from 1,000 people. It's what you like, this is your interest, it customizes. And same thing happens with Google also, right? What do you search, right, in Google search engine, or say what you have searched in the past, or present, you see the relevant ad, right? It it tracks the user behavior, and so it shows the relevant ad. And same thing, I think most of the Google products, right? Google News, if you sign in and you view Google News, if you search about certain topic, it ensures that topic is added to your interest. Every time there is a news, that word is tagged somewhere.
It's 8 o'clock.
That word is tagged somewhere. It tells you, all right, this is a relevant news. That's how it personalizes, right, your experience basis data, right? Moving on. So what is data driven product management, right? It is nothing but making decisions based on real world information, right? Very simple, right? It helps understanding the data, of course, it helps you uncover the right insights and ultimately build the right product, right? I'll keep the definition very simple. I'll not spend too much time on the theory part, right? But I hope you understand, right? Because data driven product management, from the name itself, it's pretty clear. You are building a data backed things, data backed, whatever you're building for the customer, for the business, right? It has to be data backed. Right? Why is it important? Right? For every PM, there is a fundamental question: what to build, right? Every day in, day out, you have a team of engineers, analysts, data scientists, and designers, right? What to build. As a PM, it's very important for you to prioritize, to build basis data, right? There are ways and measures to capture data for basis your use case, whether you are doing funnel optimization, whether you are building something for user acquisition, whether you are trying to enhance current users experience, or you are building a new feature for onboarding or checkout, right? Basis your journey, it's very critical. Any change you do, any feature you roll out, right, and you have to have certain data backing in the process, right? So typically, why is it important, where is it used? You can take informed product decisions, right? You want to enhance user experience, you want to influence without authority. This is very important, guys, because every now and then we might hear entry that product manager is the CEO of the product. Now the nuance is that as a CEO, you have all the authority in the world. As a product manager, you do not, right? You have a team of engineers who do not report to you. You have a team of designers. Again, they do not report to you because they're reporting to their vertical heads, respectively, all of them, right? But you have to come as a single pod and deliver. Now, if you do not have any influence over them, you are practically not having a very fruitful relationship, which is futile for your product, right? You have to go hand in hand. Another important skill is, and of course, data helps, right? Once you have the data, it's very easy to convince people. Another important skill for a rockstar PM is how you tell stories, right? You have to be a very good storyteller because as a PM, you will be speaking to business, you will be speaking to designers, you will be speaking to engineers. You are master of. Parik, you want to say something? Okay. So as a PM, right, you're master of none because there's a business team who knows business better than you do. There is an engineering team who know better uh, than what you do, but what you know, sorry, right? There's a designer, the team, of course, they have specialized skills. As a product manager, you just master the process of building product, right? You do not have a specialized skill. Today, you might have seen, right, a product manager working in a specific industry, specific company can move around in different industry or company altogether, right? They do not have to be specialized already. Product manager for a pharma industry cannot go to a telecom industry or vice versa, right? If they both are working on the tech side of the world, tech side of the products, right? It's not very difficult. Now, these are some of the skills which are very critical for a good PM, right? Next is for prioritizing tasks and features, right? You have to have certain decision making backed by data. How do you prioritize your tasks and features in your user journey? Now, what will this lead to? The outcome will be, of course, successful product launches, happier customers, and profitable businesses. We always keep customers at the center. We read, right, customers at the center. But it's equally important that anything you build, it aligns with the larger strategy of the org and it generates enough business value. Otherwise, it's very difficult for businesses to sustain for a longer period of time, right? So happier customers and everything is fine, but the business value has to be there in the journey, in your value mapping, right? Moving on. Now, how is it done? Right, data driven, because from day zero, when you start building your product, of course, you do not know anything, right? You do not know how user will behave, right? You start with small experiments, right? You start with hypothesis. This is a very standard way of writing hypothesis, right? We believe that this particular capability will result in customer whatever your goal is, right? And your success metric. What will be the measurable signal? Say, for example, when Facebook started, right, initially back in 2013, the North Star metric was that every single person has to have 7 friends in 10 days, right? Initially, this was their North Star metric for a very short period of time. That's when they knew, because uh, if every person goes on to have 7 other friends, we're talking about, a few days only, we're talking about 1 billion people. It is an exponential growth. Similarly, Dropbox, when they started, their North Star metric was every person, one folder, one file per device. Right. This was their North Star metric. So that was the measurable signal they had, that for this particular capability will lead to so and so, and this is how will we measure that it has succeeded. Right? This was the North Star metric. Right. So to summarize, it is you build something, you measure, you learn, and iterate. This is a very simple diagram. There's some idea. How does the idea come? You see new trends, you do market research, you see what competitors are doing, you do your own analytics, you build something, right? You build the product, you measure the behavior, measure how users are behaving, whether they are able to use it effectively or not, or they're dropping, what has changed basis your last change or transition in the app or in the product, right? You learn and you again iterate, right? This is a very simple example of how things are done, right? Guys, I'm not stopping for questions like I think Rishit has already mentioned. I would like to follow the same pattern. We'll take questions basis whenever you raise your hands, right? Or we'll take questions in the end. All right. Moving on. This is a very important part of data driven product management, right? We're talking about the analytics. There are three key areas where we talk about the analytics for data driven product managers. One is the adoption, one is engagement and retention, right? Adoption, name is giving it away. It focuses on the new usage. Whenever you launch a new product or a new feature, how much of it is being used, right? By existing or new users, basis it is existing feature or a new feature, right? Engagement, it of course talks about measurement of involvement of users with the product, right? How many they use it. You onboard something is fine, right? You onboard a user is fine. It's just one part of it, but how are they using your product is very critical for the business, right? And for you also. Another is retention, right? How many users are returning to the product? They, whether they are just using it for the single time, they like, dislike, they move on, they came for trial, what is the reason, right? This is a very important metric for your customer lifetime value. Of course, if you have a high retention, you will have high gross revenue, right? Your MRR will of course be on the high side, because cost of acquisition, we need to understand, in business is always higher than maintaining your existing customer base. This is very critical. Moving on, we'll deep dive into adoption, right? Adoption is adoption is, there's a 2x2 matrix for existing features and existing users. But we say if it is for existing users and features, it is engagement. If it is for new users, there's some existing feature, we call it external adoption, right? External adoption is nothing but when there is a new user is coming to our product or platform and is trying to use something, some existing feature. And if an existing user is trying to use a new feature, it is internal adoption. A new user, new feature is external adoption, right? Any questions so far? I'll take it as a no. Moving on. What is adoption rate, right? Adoption rate is nothing but, to simply put, percentage of first time users, right? Time to first action is a mean time for new users to try a new feature or new product, right? How much time they are taking to try a new feature, right? Whether your new feature is discoverable, do they know, something new has come up, is there a nudge towards a new feature, or are they finding it too complex, right? And last part is efficiency. It is the insight into why adoption of a new product or feature is delayed, if it is, right? How complex or easy it is for any person, new or existing, to use a new feature, right? These are the three levers which helps you deep dive into adoption, right? Yes, Takir.
Hi, I have a question that how do you approach a scenario where your user base is segmented into different niche, and each of these are quite, different from each other in terms of their patterns, user behavior, and their demographic to begin with. So how do you approach different segments, and sort of how do you make a single product for a multiple types of customers, users?
So Takir, we always start product building by identifying the problem space, right? At the outset, right? We might not be building, or my product might not be catering to all the segment of users, right? Say for example, Uber, Ola, right? If I already have cars with me, I might not be very extensive extensive user of the product, right? Your product building or the product conception or hypothesis, the very first principle is you define the problem you're trying to solve, right? Then you define the persona, that who can be your probable customers. This is what you will solve for, and this is how you will solve, right? Say for example, Uber, when when they started, they had limited, what do you call, limited pool of cars. They did not have this segment from day zero. This is my luxury segment, this is my sedan segment. They started with hatchback and mini, right? I might be mixing Ola and Uber, right? And that's how you evolve. So you define the problem statement, you define your problem space, you scope your problem, that this will be something I'll be solving, right? This will be my user base. This is how they will look like. This will be the persona. and this is how I will try to approach. And as you go on, right, basis you get the data, how people are using your product, how what is missing, what is not. You take feedback. You, like I said, right, you do competitor study, and that's how you build a roadmap. You might not be solving for all the segment of the customers. You can take any example, right? Say cred, right? Cred is when they started, the underlying problem they were solving. Now, of course, it has expanded. The underlying problem they were solving was to ensure that people are paying their credit card bills on time, right? It was more of an aggregator. It shows all your credit cards. It tells this is your due date. It tells your reward points. And when they started, right now, of course, they have expanded basis user behavior, and taking qualitative feedback, speaking to customers, what is missing, and there's a roadmap in place. But to answer to your question, you might not be building at all. That's a strategic call. Cool. Moving on. For engagement, you check active users, your daily active users, weekly and monthly active users, your usage frequency, recency. Recency and frequency can be used for simple segmentation of customers, right? To send out marketing promotions, to send out some sort of campaigns, right? Basis different campaigns. You might want to send them some sort of subscription, and so on and so forth, right? Frequency and recency. Depth of use, what all features customers are using. It's very important for us to understand how people are engaging, how our users are engaging with the product, because you really do not want to spend your time and resources to complicate something which is already solving people's problem, right? And the time spent is nothing but what is the average time people are spending to do a certain activity, right? If the time spent is beyond a certain amount, then of course there's some problem. People are not able to do that particular activity because they feel it's complex, or the steps to perform that particular activity are more than they should be, right? So these are the metrics which you track in engagement. Yes, Sakir, you raised your hand.
No, I didn't. I don't think so.
Okay, it's coming time and again. No worries. Moving on. Uh, on the retention piece, right? There are two pieces in retention. One is the retention curve and cohort analysis, right? Retention curve is nothing but it helps you monitor your retention over a period of time. It's a plot between the number of users and the time period, right? Let's say day zero or month zero, you had 100 users, and how they what are the number of users in month six, right? What was your graph? How many people actually retained who joined in say January, right? In June, what is the percentage of people who are left on your platform or on your product, right? Second part is the cohort analysis, right? Cohort analysis is nothing but I'm sure you guys understand cohort. It's a group of people with similar user behavior, right? Now sometimes it is useful to find out how user retention relates to a specific cohort, right? Very simple example of very simple way to bring cohort is maybe a segment of people who joined in a particular month, or users with similar depth of use, right? Maybe some people joined in the month of Jan, Feb, March. You might want to segment them accordingly, or people who use feature X, Y, Z and PQR, you might want to club them separately, right? These are the metrics which you use in retention, and you analyze that how is your retention and what all you need to improve, right? Moving on, the skill sets required. Again, like I said, the list is not exhaustive, but these are very critical skills. For being a data-driven product manager, you need to have basic understanding of SQL, right? Because you reduce the turnaround time, you reduce the dependency on your product analyst and data analyst, right? You know enough about the data to ask the right questions, right? This might sound very simple, but at times we just take this for granted, right? We do not get too much into data, and we are so focused on building our roadmap, building the next set of features, right? What competitor has built, but it's very critical to understand the data so that you ask the right questions from business stakeholders, from customers, you gauge user behavior, right? Now, since you're talking about data-driven side of the world, right, you should know how to work with data scientists, data engineers, designers, and analytics, right? Data scientists and data engineers, of course, you need to have one-on-one sessions, one-on-one, knowledge base on how they work. Rishad also mentioned there are certain key concepts, very, very generic concepts. You might not need to master all of them, but a basic understanding so that you can at least have a decent conversation or a depth conversation in your sprint, in your catch-ups, and you have respect for each other's work. Nikhil, you have raised your hand. Please go on.
Yes, Ishan. So yeah, I wanted to ask that. Yeah, I got it that data product manager should know about basic SQL. So you had also written that Python also. So how much of, if yes, and then how much of a Python does a data product manager should need to know? Because I understood, and I am working in analytics. The product manager working with me works on data products. He also knows, understands basically. He don't know SQL, but he basically understands that, okay, what are the databases, what is the architecture and things like that. But yeah, so my question is, yeah, how much of
See,
a
as a PM, you might not be expected to master how database is, how the data is being stored, or how what is the architecture of this particular database, or you might not be asked to write stored procedures, right? Very simple select statements to gather insights, right? You did something, but you might want to and you might want to look at the trends, look at the patterns of certain things, right? Say, for example, you launched a feature last week, and a simple query would be that people who landed on this specific page, on this previous page, or who did this activity previously and in last 1 week, right? You should not be dependent for such simple queries on your product analyst or data analyst for that matter.
okay, so that's about the SQL. So this also explains about the Python part.
Yes.
Okay.
Mainly you would be just gathering the insights, right? To understand what was the trend, what has been the trend after your last launch or last change, or if you're running some experiments or maybe testing, and you would want to gather some results, you should be able to do it without too much dependency on your product analyst.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Ishant. Yeah.
No problem. Right. Knowing how to present and democratize data. Democratizing data is very, very critical, right? Your data should be as close as possible to the business, because that's where it adds most of the value. And roadmap prioritization has to be based on data. I think this I covered in the beginning as well. That when you build your roadmap, it has to be data backed. Your decisions, your product decisions have to have certain data backing. Of course, there will be different elements. Maybe some competitor has launched something, or there's a certain break, certain change in the trend. People are looking for something. There's some external factor which is beyond your control, like COVID happened, right? Or something else might happen. I don't know. I hope it's not. It doesn't. But right, your prioritization has to have your purely data backing, right? And for prioritization also, there are different models. I'd not like to go in details in the interest of time, right? But there are different models on how to prioritize data. There are certain data levers which help you prioritize your backlog and just build your roadmap, right? That's it from my side. I would like to take questions. I would be happy to take questions if any.
There's a question in chat box by Hiren. So Hiren is asking, what are the overlapping responsibilities between data PM and data scientist DS?
Got it. So as a data scientist, you will be working purely on core algorithms. You will be writing algorithms. You will be building models, right, to solve a problem. As a data PM, you will be defining the problem, but you will know enough TS to scope out the problem, to have conversations with them, right? But as a data scientist, you will be building the solution. As a PM, you do not build the solution. Does that answer? Hiren?
Yeah, thanks.
Hemant, you have a question? You have raised your hand.
Yes, hi Shant. See, I represent a D2C personal care brand, a renowned brand in India. See, so far, company's focus has largely been into acquiring new customers pretty much every day. Now, of course, there's a finite that universe that you can target, and then you have to look at retention, monetization.
So Hemant, I'm losing you in between.
Okay, okay, so I'll repeat myself. So I'm saying I represent a D2C brand in personal care space.
Yeah.
So far, organization focus has been in acquiring new customer pretty much every day through paid marketing channels. Now we have reached a universe where we can actually start looking at repeat purchases, repeat retention of the customers, and we want to build a sort of a data center of excellence. So what should be the starting point for us for a B2C brand in a personal care?
So starting point for what? Sorry.
Starting point to build a sort of a data center of excellence where we can start leveraging our data, where we can start understanding our data and monetize it and sort of drive retention and repeat purchases. So far the focus has been largely acquisition, not retention. And this is coming from the slide where we mentioned about RFP model and thinking about data.
Right. So I meant to start with, I think to build data center of excellence, you need to start capturing all the data pertaining to campaigns, transactions, every possible data you can, right, and bring into one place, because that's how you will get the synergy. There have been organizations who have their data centers, who have their databases, they run in silos, right, but they lose out on a lot of intelligence because they do not talk to each other, right? To bring out the synergy, to ensure that your marketing data talks to sales data, it talks to your campaigns, it talks to your transactions, your funnel journeys, your app journeys, your traffic on web app, right? They should reside in one place. That's one. Secondly, once we have all this data, you might have certain pointed questions, right? Basis which you would design your solution. Say, for example, you might want to now, of course, acquisition is like you said, right? Resources are finite. You have reach enough people through paid channels. Now, say you want to solve a problem where you want to say, I want to increase my repeat buying. So now your funnel should look like, I would be reaching out to my existing customers, and of course you have done your segmentation before, basis your recency and frequency and certain order value. So people who have bought something, say X value for your B2C brand, say 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees in last 6 months or 3 months, right? And at least they should have at least a single purchase in last 1 month, right, or 3 months, right? You can design your logic, and that's how you can create a very specific campaign, and you can alter the you can monitor the conversions, right? Now this will enable you, one, you will not be carpet bombing. You will know that they are your existing customer, they bought this, and of course you can get certain there are ways to get their likes and dislikes. What are they using, or they're not, basis if they're using a competitor or so on and so forth, right? Basis that you can send out very targeted campaigns. The cost will be, of course, lower, because they have already used and tested your product, right? And yeah, that's the way to go. But to solve this, right, you have to have a top down approach. What problem are you solving? Because for retention you might have to have a different way to solve. For a person who is you want to increase the order ticket value, might have to do something different, right? So the question is, the underlying statement is, what problem are you trying to solve? And to build a data center of excellence, of course, you have to have all the data in single place, and they should talk to each other. That's very critical. Does that answer, Hemant?
Yeah, it does answer the question. Thank you.
Dipesh, you have raised your hand. And
Hi, Shant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think data product management is new in India. So I want to know about the job market in this field. I have 1 year of experience in data science and ML.
So I think this part is already covered by Rishit, right? It is new in India, maybe for startups level of org, but it has been there. Platform and data PM has been there for a while now, right? And job market, it's very subjective, but I think I think every good org, every other org is looking at hiring data PMs because they want to have uh, their products backed by data and somebody who understands both business and data, right? So it's very subjective, but I think the market right now it's pretty hot for overall PM space, be it platform, product, or growth, data product or growth.
Thanks, got it.
Thank you, Dipesh. Actually, Afridi has a question, but can we take it in the very end?
Sure.
Because we are very short on time. So yeah, we should, I think, get started with the third session. Um, yes, so for the third session, we have with us Sharad Babu. So Sharad is a data-driven product manager with 8 years of experience across product management and analytics. Currently, he's building product strategy for analytics and data platform at Decent. Earlier, he was working as a product manager at Rezapi, where he built the analytics and data platform teams. So from here now, I would like to hand over the session to Sharad. Hey Sharad, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you, Priyanka. I think you have been doing an excellent job at introducing folks. So I think that's great, right? So I think there were a couple of very insightful sessions, both by Rishit and Nishan. So most of the things that I'd probably go ahead and tell you would be repetition of some sort and probably some deep dives in parts, right? But yeah, again, for most people who have been intensely listening to this is a small break. Because I'm a huge F1 fan, I was trying to follow F1 in parallel. Max Verstappen just got the pole. That means he'll be starting at the front tomorrow, right? Just so that we just go back from here, take a small step back, and then start off again, right? Yeah, go Max for everybody. But yeah, I'm a Hamilton fan. But yeah, back to product analytics, more serious topics, right? Let's start. Okay. All right. Before I even get into this thing, right? One of the things that in a product management space, right? Solving user problems is the primary job of a product manager, right? Or getting to the space where you define a product or a feature to solve user problems is the primary role that a product manager plays. Rallies people around that same notion of helping the user problem, solving the user problem, and get there, right? So that's basically it, right? Now, at some point in time, right, I think this word gets mentioned often, which is scale, right? A few things that you do are not scalable, right? Whether it's people, process, or technology, right? They need upgradations and they need tweakings, etc., right? Product analytics is a manifestation of one of the scale problems, right? That scale problem is the user interviews, right? One of the key ways in which product gets feedback is by talking to users, right? When you're probably 100 users, 500 users, etc., right? You can still do 20 calls, 30 calls once in a while, right? And then still get feedback, right? For whatever features, right? Why once you hit scale, right? Or like get product market fit, as they call it, then somehow, right? The getting that user feedback becomes non-scalable, right? And that's when what happens, right? Over a period of time is you start relying on rather than qualitative feedback, right? You start relying on quantitative feedback for you to close in the gap of validation loop or the feedback loop. Okay. With that in background, right? This is what we have in store for you, right? I'll try to basically go a little deeper on what product analytics is, right? We'll talk about the three pillars in product analytics, right? Then how does product analytics evolve in general in an organization? I'll also touch upon a couple of not a couple of, but a metrics framework that I have found most useful, right? And then also like some of the questions that are around what is the tool that we select, how do we ensure that we select the right tool at what stage, right? And probably if time permits, right, we do Q&A after the session or at the very, right? So with that in mind, right, let's go towards the first slide, right? Okay. Right. The journey on the right is something that I picked up from a famous tool for product analytics, which is Amplitude, right? Right. That journey basically defines places where product analytics can play a role, right? I'll not go deeper into it. It's just a representation, right? But at most points, right, product analytics is a substitute, right, for quantitative understanding of user behavior, right? It is, but it is not a substitute for user interviews. Just calling that out so that we don't stop doing user interviews and getting feedback directly from user, right? But still, to close down that feedback loop, right, quickly, we build quantitative user information, right, through data, so that we have validations of the features that will build later stages, right? Also, having a quantitative understanding of user behavior helps us develop hypothesis for product development, right? I think both Ishant and Rishit touched upon this, right? When we want to start building something, right, the first thing that some of us ask is, what is the market, right? Is there a need for it, right? Is there a customer problem that we are trying to solve, right? With all of that said and done, right, the moment somebody says there is yes, it is an opinion, right? But when data comes back and says it is a yes, there is a need, then it moves from opinion to hypothesis that gets proved, right? So this is the journey that the product analytics tries to take, right? You build the quantitative understanding of the user, develop hypothesis, build the product, experiment with it so that you can get a quicker validation or feedback loops, and then finally understand the true impact of the product that you've built, right, through data, right? And most of these things, right, what I'm talking about right now, is very it becomes very relevant as the product closer to product market fit, right, from it is okay. What are the three pillars of product analytics, right? Of course, this is true with any system or any organization. It will be people, process, and technology, right? I had the fortune of building out the product analytics team in Razorpay, and this was my learning from that. So I'm just sharing that. So who are these? Who are the people, right? Analysts, data engineers, and data scientists are the primary people, right? Who will build and ensure that the product analytics keeps running, right? And there are other consumers of data who will shape how product analytics gets built in an organization, right? Now, once you have people, right? Again, scale problems, you need to bring in processes so that everybody is following a set of processes that standardizes things uh, and have best practices across, create a workflow where people have predictability in the work that you get as an output, and then keep evangelizing the work that the team does so that you will end up ensuring the work or the insights that is got and the process through which you arrive at the insight is well known across the company so that it becomes a repeatable success across multiple teams rather than a siloed effort in one team, right? Now, of course, all of this is assisted or made possible through the technologies that the current day enables, right? Whether it is your BI tool or a product analytics tool or the data platform in which you have built or stored the data and then try to access it, etc. Right? So with that in mind, right? How do you shape these people, process, and technology across different stages of a company, right? Because that's one of the most important parts, right? These are the three pillars, right? And how do these three pillars stage up across three different stages, right? Early stage is when you're just building out the product, you're not really sure what shape the product should take up, right? What market or what part of the market? You probably know the general market, but what part of the market will your growth start happening or get as in your product gets adopted, right? Versus once you find the product market fit, and of course there's exponential growth phase, and then once the scale up phase, right? So across all of these things, right, I've just tried to simplify across all of these things and then put together a small matrix, right, where you say whenever you're hiring people, right, early stage, hire generalists, right? People who probably know engineering, analytics, as well as some bit of domain or product, right? Uh, Empower them with knowledge, right? Give them the right set of accesses, or access to people and access to data and technology, right? And give them enough time to build their domain knowledge, right? So that helps them to actually become the key people who can influence decisions across product, right? As you move towards a PMF, right? Uh, when I say higher team specific, right, each of the marketing teams or the business units, right, in your organization, whether it is like probably business unit A, business unit B, business unit C, as in trying to work with different kinds of product, each of them will have their own domain specific knowledge. Probably they have their own specific data requirements, etc. So start hiring team specific people, right? Ensure that there is a robust onboarding process. That means you record whatever has been learned already in a good place so that people can utilize and then start from that platform, right? And always the person who joins at a PMF stage always needs to be able to think about scaling stuff from there, right? Meaning ensuring that we are ready for the next stage, right? Once you hit a scaled organization, right? That means you know that there's a very good product market fit. You're growing right, left, and center, and you're at a place where you say, okay, now is the time, right? Um, I need to ensure that I get the best out of my data, and I ensure that I suck the juice out of it, right? So that's when you hire specialists. When I say specialists, people like if you look at analytics, there are various forms of analytics that you do, or even data science. Some people are good at image processing, some people are good at um, text, right? Text mining, etc. So once you get to a scale product, then you'll realize what are the kinds of requirements that you have both for analytics, engineering, as well as data scientists. That's where you hire specialists. Uh, those people will come in and improve the overall analytics quality in the organization, right? And then they will always think about optimizing the technology as well as people for maximum output, right? Similarly, beginning processes needs to be experimental in nature. Focus on the outcomes, right? Not even insight, right? Is this data available? Can I get it? And then can somebody read it, right? It can be just like taking in parallel. You can just run a SQL query, put it in a Google sheet, and then share it with people. People can draw their own charts, right? Ensure that there is less dev effort and people don't get bogged down by prioritization, etc. Right? So ensure that it is a self-sufficient unit. Right? Once you start moving to the PMF phase is when you start bringing in processes. You focus on impact, right? Okay, there was this outcome. What did that outcome actually mean to people, right? How did it affect the product development phase, right? And then start documenting all of this, right? Why is that as an impact of as in focusing on impact is very important is because the moment you start going towards PMF, right, is when you start democratizing data a lot more. Meaning when I say democratization of data, right, analytics should not be a bottleneck for people to get their insights, right? It should be available at their anybody's fingertip, whether it's an operations manager, client, as in customer support person, a product manager, or a CEO of the company, right? They should have data at their fingertips for them to get it like through SQL queries or through systems that can throw out data, right? At most points, use SaaS platforms, like paying them upfront is a good way. And it will also boil down from the strategy of the company and the data platform itself. But in general, it's quicker and the MV as in to buy at those stages than build. Again, there's no one size fits all answer for all of the questions that comes up. But yeah, this is a generic advice, right? And then going to the process in the scale process, right? Once you've documented well, right, and you've established certain set of process, you can always keep innovating and improving. The focus on innovation towards analytics and the process improvement should come in, but also measuring the efficiency of the team, the process of the technology, etc., should happen. And you should start evangelizing what analytics has been done so that people can, as I said, do repeatable success across multiple teams, right? On the technology side, it's very important to establish best practices in terms of both in terms of data governance, data quality, etc., right? Also in terms of writing code, maintaining code, etc., right? And also the biggest part, right, which is basically once you invest in technologies, measure the return on investment. Okay. Now, moving on, right? How does a product analytics function evolve in an organization? How does it contribute and evolve, right? Always, right? The biggest contribution at a very early stage is helping people define what is the right success metric, helping them instrument it well, meaning ensuring that the right events are sent or the right database entries are done, right? To ensure that you build that basic construct for people to start getting insights, right? Once you do that, right, you move to democratizing insight generation, which is basically ensure that people have the right access to the right set of data through the right set of tools for them to get to a place where they self-serve analytics, right? They don't have to come back to an analyst for every small question on data, right? Now, once all of this is set up is when you really start looking and going deeper into data and start extracting insights that will influence, right, the decisions that gets done, right? These are not necessarily the order in which it has to happen, but these are the ones that will the impact, right? The like the bottom up approach of building the analytics function, right? Then there is a bit of analytics thought leadership where the people with domain knowledge plus the analytics skills, right, come up with data and the hypothesis and insight so that it will basically form the construct of the product, just as the product has to be shaped well from the product manager, right? Once all of this is done, right, how do you operationalize this insights into an intelligent cycle where it directly flows into a product's operational flow? This is how the product analytics evolution happens inside a company. And again, the top of the pyramid in most companies are never reached, right? It's a very difficult journey. It takes about, as in, at least the industry average is about 5 to 6 years, right? Until unless you're for a lack of better word, AI first company, right? Unless until you're that whose core product itself is data or artificial intelligence or data science in nature, the top of the pyramid is not reached at most organizations, right? Right. Moving on, right? The most impactful work at the start of the product analytics journey is about defining metrics, right? And of course, having a framework always helps to define these metrics. And there are a couple of frameworks that are very, very like famous, which is basically AARRR by the Pirates and Hard Framework by Google, right? I'm just trying to combine some of these things and then others that I've seen, like this North Star metrics, etc. To get into a place where you say, okay, what are like if there's a product, right, or a feature that has to go live, right, or that is being built, not go live, right? What are the kind of things that we should have as a checklist? Write down those metrics and say classify them into input and output metrics. Input metrics are the ones that are under our control. Output metrics are the ones that happens because of controlling the input metrics, right? Basically, an input metrics is how we know like what is the customer touch points, right? And then measuring those touch points. Output metric is the revenue generated by this thing, right? You can always influence the customer touch point. The revenue generated is a factor of many other things, right? So in that sense, take all of these things, right? Like if you're building a new feature, how does this feature or product attract new users, right? If you once you build that, right, how well do the users, right, know a product to engage with that product or feature, right? This is a question that you need to ask when you're trying to build that success metric, right? Then the usefulness of that feature, right? You built a feature and you believe that it is the most useful feature for the customer, but unfortunately, as in that sometimes is not true. Even if the data tells you it is the right thing to do, right? Sometimes it does not turn out to be true because the user behavior is a lot different, right? Then you really see, right, does the product solve an important customer problem? What is it actually solving, right? Then how frequently do the customers use your product, right? How frequently do they come back and use that feature will define your retention and happiness, which is basically your NPS, or which kicks into your referrals or other forms of growth, right? How happy are your customers using your product, right? So this is the framework that you could probably use, right, in terms of getting the initial set of metrics. Obviously, all of this need not be done for each of the features that you build. All you need to do is have all of this in mind, try to write them down, and then discuss, debate, and get to a couple of them so that you will be able to measure your feature and its impact, right? And when you're going for tool selection, right, for any tool, right, any analytics tool, right, for you to get going quicker, right, the biggest thing that you need to do is ensure that you do a thorough analysis of what's there in the market. And some of these are probably the parameters that you can look at to ensure that you do a thorough analysis. Tech stack, right? You built on a certain tech stack. The entire product is built on a certain tech stack. How well does the analytics tool that you're as in choosing, right, gel well or stitch into the tech stack, right? Because as in what you buy today or what you try to build today, right, should also scale for like 6 years, right? That's the idea with which you should start off, right? Obviously, 2-3 years down the lane you might change, or even 18 months down the lane you can get a better tool, etc. But how well does it fit into your tech stack? That awareness should be always there, right? What is the visualization depth that is available? Funnel visualization, cohort visualization. Of course, there should be basic charts. How well can you visualize the data is very important again. Analysis, right? How does it enable self-serve analysis? As in, for example, like one against the other, like look, as in something that offers you to do table calculations on the UI versus something that requires you to do everything in the backend, right? How easy it is, right? Whether it is drag and drop, or do you always have to write a query? Whether is it just about building tools, or can I do exploratory data analysis? Can I do some predictive analysis? Are there built-in functions? Right? Can I also do experimentation using this, or can I push the data to the experimentation platform and get it back from there? Right? All of these are things that you can evaluate. How do you share some of the analysis and insights that are available on this thing? How can you send notifications? It can be email, Slack. There are WhatsApp integrations, right? Then can you create alerts? What are the kind of integration does it have? What are the channels in which it can send your notifications? All of this are important for you to get to a stage where you analytics team do not become the blocker, and as a product manager and as an organization, you're self-sufficient towards building a democratized version of data, right? Of course, governance is an important part, like especially for us, as in when I was at TracePay, right? And even when at Paycent, compliance is a very important thing. Are you hosted in the same region that you need to be hosted? Is the data secure? Is it not? As in, does it not have security issues, right? And then, do right people have the access to right data? All of those things will come into picture. People look at governance as a very big problem. That's a debate for another day, right? But governance is a way for us to reduce the noise and give the right signals to people, right? When they're accessing data, right? Of course, you will also need to consider cost, because that's how you'll calculate ROI. There are different costing structures, like something like a mixed panel, if I remember correctly, it does it per user. Some of the other things, like something like a segment and amplitude, does it per events, right? And then there are certain things like the number of queries that you hit, that is the usage, right? These are the ways in which some of the tools also there. So all of this combined, you can probably form a scoring system and then present it, and then figure out a way to actually do the tool selection at the end of the day, right? So these are the parameters. I'm not saying this is exhaustive, but these are some of the things like that will help you get to a structure which can be passed across each and every tool, so that you can get the right tool at the end of the day, right? I think that's all I had. Again, Priyanka, we can take the questions now, or we can then we can feel free to do it at the end of the session.
Yeah, sure. We can take it at the end if, because I can't see anybody has raised their hand. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I think there's one by Keshav, right? Keshav, how do you measure usefulness? Isn't measuring usefulness will be a mix of engagement and happiness index? Partly right, right? Usefulness is also about, again, usefulness. There's a difference between B2C and B2B metrics that people try to look at, right? The jobs to be done, right? The most efficient way of moving data from A to B, right? From user perspective versus what can be done better, right? Is very different, right? So in that framework, okay, usefulness is a measure of are we providing the best way for the user to do the job that the user has posed as a problem, right? How have we made it the most efficient way to do it? That's how you look at usefulness. All right.
Thank you, Sarath, for this answer. I just have this question on how you're gonna measure it. You did explain it out very well, but when you talk about data and metrics, what metrics we're gonna put it down to measure if this feature is going to be useful? From my understanding, I thought it's gonna be basically adoption rate, basically engagement, adoption, as well as and the happiness index. That's how it's gonna let us know that okay, the product has been good. It has been quite useful to the users. And if other than this, what all metrics can we consider so as to measure the usefulness of the product?
Okay, I'll take a slightly tangential example, and then probably also a little controversial maybe. It's like, okay, so when iPhone was built, right? Uh, like how much ever we want to believe that it was built based on a lot of insights and data, right? It was the user need, right? There was iPod, there was internet, and there was a phone, right? The usefulness of all of them together was never realized by the user, right? uh, no amount of data or insights might have influenced that decision, right? uh, Measuring that is very hard, usefulness of this thing, right? So but again, signals, putting them together and ensuring that you can do a better job of having, instead of three devices, a single device to do all of these three, is measuring the usefulness, right? There are ways to get to the specifics of it. Again, there is no one size fits all answer for it. What I would suggest is that I mean, from my experience, right, uh, moving data from, like, let's say a warm storage to cold storage, right? There are plenty of ways, right? What is the most easiest way versus what is the most useful way for a user is something that you have to find through experimentation and gathering data around those experiments, which is a little difficult to measure, honestly, right? But that's how you iterate on the product.
I guess I'm not able to articulate properly.
Yeah,
I was
I
trying to
think
understand. I guess I'm trying to understand what metrics one gonna use to see the product is successful, if the and usefulness is there for the product. Because the usefulness is gonna come when you've already launched the product, not we are near planning to launch, right? So you're gonna measure if the product has been yet useful for the customer or not. So what metrics you're gonna use other than engagement, adoption, and happiness index?
yeah.
That's
So yeah,
yeah.
again, probably as in I am suffering from the same this thing, right? So I'm also not probably able to articulate that well, which is basically right. When you need to measure the usefulness, you would have probably built the product for a certain reason, right? And the product is again being used for a different reason, right? Or the way you are defined the user journey versus the way the user journey is being done, right, is different, right? Classic example is reconciliation in what do you call it as fintech companies. The product that you build is to do automatic reconciliation, but what you realize is the user journey is breaking, right? It's becoming offline in some parts. It had to be online in all parts, right? So you calculate at what point in the user journey is there a major drop off. Okay. For example, they uploaded the file, there was a user, as in there was a reconciliation progress. Then there was a break in this thing, and then the flow continued at some other point, right? Then you figure out what is the most useful way to do it, right? Then you look at the data, there is a user drop off, then you go back to the user interviews, talk to users who have probably dropped off at that point, and then ask why is that as in, why is that you dropped off here, and then you come back, right? So again, metrics does not always answer all part of the question. That was what I was trying to say in my previous thing as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sharad. Thank you for the presentation. Now we can move to the last session of the masterclass. So the last session is how to be data driven and how to craft your portfolio to transition into the data PM role. So for that, we have a consultant turned product manager at Jaikas, Shautrik Jawdar. Previously, he was working as a strategy and analytics consultant at Deloitte, and he was analytics consultant at Tredence. So, hey Shautrik, can you hear me? Please, let's go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Priyanka. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'll share my screen and let me know if it's visible.
Sure.
Okay, I think I have to allow privacy setting. Just give me a moment. Okay, so Priyanka, I think I'm facing some issues with my privacy settings. So I have the slide with you. I had emailed you. Can you please share the screen? Probably that'll be faster.
Yeah, just a second. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, meanwhile, let me also try and see if I can. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen. Yeah. All right. So,
Okay.
all right, I think we can get started. So, hello everyone, and thank you for attending the session. I hope you're having a great time. We had three very insightful sessions from the speakers today, and I hope you got a great experience learning from every one of them. So my topic for today is specifically about how to craft your portfolio to be more data driven, right? And how do you show evidences that you are a data driven person in general? So to address that problem, how I'm going to tackle this problem is I'm going to talk about what it basically means to be data driven, right? It doesn't necessarily, you don't have to be a product manager already, or you can be in any other profession. It can be consulting, it can be marketing or any other domain, right? What exactly does it mean to be data driven? So I've come up with a framework. So based on my past examples, having worked as a consultant as well as an analytics person, there are actually three questions that you need to ask yourself, right? And the order in which you ask these three questions are very important. Uh, so I'll introduce a three-question framework now. So Priyanka, if you can go to the next slide. Sorry, we have to do with this. Yeah. Okay. So the three questions that we have to ask ourselves is why, what, and how. So the first question, let me deep dive into the first question here. When I ask why, I'm asking, why do I need the data? So that's the first question that you ask yourself. Why do I need the data? What is the problem that I'm solving exactly? So to deep dive on that, let's look at some examples of problems that you can see in real life, irrespective of your profession, right? So Priyanka, if you can go to the next one. Yeah. So just a big fan of Marlon Brando and the movie Godfather. So this is him explaining that, okay, don't jump into, conclusions. Let's take a step back. Let's ask ourselves first, why do we need the data? And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about what are the typical kinds of problems that you face. So Priyanka, if you can move on to the next one. Right. So typically, these are some examples of problems that you might face in real world as well as in the functions that you're currently operating in, right? So the first example is a root cause analysis. So what exactly is a root cause analysis? I need to explain an observed behavior, right? And these are some examples of a root cause analysis problem. So why is daily active users down by 10%, right? So I've observed that there's a drop in a metric, daily active users in this case. I need to explain why there's a drop. And for that, I would need data. So that's the why do I need the data part. Another example, why did premium user subscription grow 15% month on month, right? So these are kinds of observed behaviors which I need to explain. The next type of problems that usually people face or try to solve is exploratory analysis, right? I want to explore data. So I have a lot of data. I want to explore and find relationships which were previously unknown. So an example of that kind of a problem, this is a problem which I actually have solved in my previous work experience, is what actionable patterns might I observe in the customer feedback data that can help me improve the business, right? So the business was having a lot of customer feedback data. What are the patterns that I can explore within this data and give some actionable insights that can help improve the business? The third kind of problem that we are going to talk about is related to predictive analysis of data, right? So here, the essence of the problem is I want to predict or estimate something, right? And this is the kind of problems that data PMs uh, generally face or generally try to solve, right? So the problems can revolve around how can I estimate house prices, right? So this is an example of a real life problem which is done by Zillow. So they have a thing called Zestimate, which kind of estimates that what is the house price of like any particular real estate within the US geography, right? So their entire business model revolves around giving a very accurate estimate of a housing price. Another example of a predictive problem is how can I predict monthly sales? It's coming from like a sales team, let's say, for example, right? So these are the kind of predictive analysis problems that you usually come across in your life. So the other example is about related to experiments. So these are related to, let's say, the crux is basically I want to find if A is different from B, or if A is different from B, C, D, and etc. other variants, right? So an example of that kind of a problem is, let's say you are a marketing manager and you have to kind of figure out, is the new sign up based design leading to more conversions compared to the older design? So you're comparing A versus B and try to figure out which is better, which is worse, and so on. So the first step is basically figuring out the problem and why do you need the data, right? So moving on to the next part. So Priyanka, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So now that you've figured out what problem you solve, why you need the data, the second part is what data do you actually need, right? So I'm just taking some examples which I mentioned in the previous slide. I'm trying to list down what are the data points that you might potentially need to actually solve a problem, right? So in the case of DAU example, right? Why is DAU down by 10%? First, you need to know what are the number of active users per day. And active users can have two components, right? It can be either new users per day, or it can be retained users per day from previous time periods, right? So you need to know what are the number of total active users per day, what are the number of new users per day, what are the number of retained users per day. And then you also need data on, let's say, user segmentation, right? Is there a specific segment of users which is contributing to this drop in DAU? What are the number of app installs and uninstalls which have happened in the recent time period? What are the kind of reviews that I've gotten recently on the Play Store, if I'm talking about an app, right? When I talk about release data, it basically I'm trying to figure out, okay, like what are the past releases that I've done in the last couple of months or last couple of weeks, depending on the release cycle of your product, and whether something was introduced in that release which is contributing to this particular drop in DAU which is observed. The other kind of data that I might need is competitor data, right? Has there been a changing positioning of any competitor? Has they come up with some offers, discounts, that sort of data, right? And the last part is market use, right? External factors, right? So for example, to give a very concrete example of this, imagine the news, the Cambridge Analytica scandal news coming up, right? Facebook's DAU might get down because people might get disheartened, people might not, might think that Facebook is kind of, not a very transparent company and not a platform where they want to share data, right? So the active usage might drop suddenly because of some market news. Another why question, for example, let's say, what is the actionable patterns that I might observe in the customer feedback data, right? So for this, what is the kind of data that I might need? I need a label data point for every feedback. So what was the issue type? What is the feedback channel through which the customer reached us? What was the issue description? What was the resolution done to remove this pain point from the customer, right? And combine it with, let's say, user segment data. What kind of demographics are facing a certain kind of problem? Or like, what is the psychographic segmentation data that I have about the users, right? And we can combine these with, let's say, the transaction data, which talks about how many products were purchased and what is the dollar value of the products purchased and the category of products purchased, right? And we can think of figuring out, are these feedbacks that I'm getting from customers actually, affecting or having any effect on the transaction data, or can I find out any patterns which can relate to the business outcome? Right. So moving on to the house estimate problem. So what are the kind of data points that you would need to typically solve this kind of a problem? Is home characteristics, right? So is your real estate, what is the total square feet area of your real estate, right? So is it a 4 BHK, is it a 3 BHK, 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, what's the area? What kind of location is it in, right? Is it a prime location, not a very busy location? How many bathrooms does your home have, right? So it's a crucial measure actually in real estate. Like in a 2 BHK, if you have like one bathroom, the price will go drastically low. And then there can be on-market data and off-market data related to, let's say, what is the listing price of the house if the house is already listed? What is the description that you have put in the listing? What are the prices of comparable homes in the area? Or how many days have you listed this particular property in the market, right? And when I talk about off-market data, it can be related to tax assessments, for example. What are the tax records that you have for your property? Do you have prior sales history and other public data that I can gather? And the last one that I might need is market trends, right? Are the prices in particular area going up or down? Is there a seasonality effect? Are people buying more houses towards, let's say, end of year when they have like a bonus check? I mean, that kind of data, right? So actually, this is the real life example of or variables which Zillow uses to come up with this estimate, right? So talking about the last kind of problem, which is related to conducting experiments, we need the control versus test group data for the experiment variable, right? So just to simplify it a bit, so control group is basically the baseline, which has gotten no change or no treatment, right? And the test group data is where you're actually doing the experiment. So to give a concrete example, let's say your sign up button was blue earlier, and now you have changed it to green, right? So your baseline was the blue button, and then your test group is basically the green button. And you measure the experiment variable, which is conversion or number of clicks on that button, to figure out, is there a significant, statistically significant change between your control and test group? So you would need to figure out, okay, what is the sample I should use for the control? What is the sample I should use for the test? What are the results of the experiment? And then I can figure out, okay, how can I solve this problem? So now we have covered at this point two major steps, right? As a data-driven individual, I have figured out why I need the data first, and then what data do I need? And then it actually all comes down to how, like you see in the next slide, it all comes down to how you actually solve the problem. So let's look at how exactly these problems can be solved when you have the data. So Priyanka, if you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so as I was saying, it all comes down to how. So here I'm trying to answer the question that how do I answer the question that I have asked in the why stage or the problem statement after I get the data. So in the first example, we talk about a MECE framework, right, or a hypothesis tree. So what exactly is a MECE framework? It stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, right? I mean, the name sounds very big, but I'll try to simplify this example. So let's say when you roll a dice, right? What are the possible outcomes that you get? You will either get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So beyond this, you cannot have any outcome, right? So the set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is mutually exclusive. It's like when you roll a dice, you cannot get a 1 and a 2 at the same time. That's why they're mutually exclusive. And collectively exhaustive means beyond this set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there can be no other possible outcomes, right? So MECE framework is actually a strategic thinking technique which consultants and product managers use to dig down into problems such as guesstimation, such as, let's say, a root cause analysis, and it can be applied to a lot of other things, a lot of other different kind of problems, right? So this is one tool which can help you solve this problem in this case. So when I move on to the second problem, how can I find actionable patterns? There can be either machine learning techniques or non-machine learning techniques, right? It's very important to understand when to use a non-machine learning technique versus, when to use a machine learning technique and what suffices in which case. So if I look at this examples, what are some non-machine learning techniques that I can use to analyze and explore the data, right? One can be, I'll make word clouds out of the issue descriptions, right? And try to figure out what the key things people are talking about my product. The other thing can be creating a simple correlation matrix, right? So for example, given that I have a kind of feedback, like a data point Y, data point X, is it actually influencing another one Y? So it's important to understand in correlation that correlation is actually not causation. I'm just trying to figure out if X increases, is Y increasing, or if Y decreases, if X decreases, is Y decreasing as well. So I'm trying to find out that relationship here, not implying that X is causing Y, right? So another technique here can be hypothesis-driven data visualization, right? So I can plot out different charts, visualizations to figure out what actually is going on with the feedback data and how it is exactly influencing the number of products purchased or the category of products purchased, or in fact the dollar amount of total products that have been purchased, right? So these are some non-machine learning techniques that you can use to solve the problem to a particular, to some extent, and then there can be machine learning techniques to address the problem at a deeper level, right? So here we can use classification models, clustering techniques, sentiment analysis. I'm not going into too much details on these techniques, right? We'll be covering them later. But yeah, so these are the kind of tools or how basically you are actually going to solve this problem. When I talk about how can I estimate house prices, uh, this is a predictive problem, right? And it's best handled by machine learning techniques. But depending on the size of data and scope, you can use anything starting from simple linear regression to a very complicated solution like a neural network, right? Depending on the scale of the problem. Uh, in the fourth example is new sign-up-based design leading to more sign-ups compared to the older design. We have to use a concept of A/B testing, right? So this kind of answers the entire spectrum of why you need the data in the first place. Then you answer what data do you need to solve the problem, and then you're answering how exactly do you solve this problem given that you have all the data. And in this entire journey, where does a product manager fit in, right? I mean, definitely he has to own the why, right? Because the core, the number one principle of product problem solving or any problem solving for that matter is clearly defining what problem they're solving, right? And why actually they need the data. If you don't define it at the very first instance, everything else in the process kind of breaks. And then you also define what kind of data you need. I mean, you can come up with your assumptions of what kind of data you need. And the how part is exactly where you have to, depending on the organization or the scale of the team, or depending on the stage the company right now is in, you might have to delve deeper into how exactly you can solve the problem. So I'll give examples of like how this, the depth of this, how knowledge can vary depending on the kind of organization that you're in. But let's move on to the next slide and see like how exactly do you acquire all these skills, right? So this is a lot of information to process in a very short period of time. So I have tried to figure out like how best can I answer your question on how you can craft your portfolio, to be a more data driven person, right? So I've used a very simple gym analogy here. So I'm talking about how you build your data muscle, right? And it's a journey from being a skinny person to being a very buff person, right? So imagine that you go to the gym, right? And in the very first day, you ask the gym trainer that, okay, can I just go and lift, 50 kilos on that bench press machine? I mean, you can go do that, but you have the chances of, injuring yourself because your core concepts are not, your core is not very strong. So the gym trainer would say, okay, he'll do a thorough assessment, and then he'll say, okay, depending on like what you want to achieve and what state you are in right now, I think you should maybe start from, strengthening your core. I mean, don't go and do the bench presses with the machines already. Probably start with doing push-ups and pull-ups and try seeing how many you can do, which kind of makes your core safe. And when you actually perform these exercises, it gives you a better understanding and a better ability to withstand these kind of advanced techniques, right? So taking that same analogy, the first thing I would like everyone to do is figure out where you are in this particular journey, right? Are you a skinny person? Are you an athletic person? Or are you buff, right? So that's the first step that you have to take. Then let's say that you are a skinny person, right? You are kind of novice to data, new to data. You don't, use data a lot. Then this is the list of I think there is Priyanka, can you put yeah, please? Yeah, thank you. All right. So depending on your assessment, right? Let's say you've assessed that, okay, I'm a skinny person, right? And what are the skills that I need to learn at this point of time in my journey? So first thing that you need to do is you learn about frameworks and concepts, right? So what is the hypothesis tree? What is MECE thinking? How do product managers and consultants use these kind of frameworks, right? And then very basic things like when to use which visualizations, right? I mean, it might be surprising, but I have actually come across people because I was actually involved in designing a training program actually in my previous job, where we had to form a cohort of people. Like I mentored a cohort of people and took them from being university freshers to being job ready and being on the floor, right? In that journey, we figured out that there are people who are really very smart, who have technical skills, but what they lack is basically is actually the basics, right? So for example, people might not actually know when to use a histogram versus, let's say, when to use a trend line, right? I mean, these kind of concepts are actually basic because you're dealing with data. You have to know what is the visualization that you have to use to actually let others also make sense of that data in the best possible manner and convey your story. And speaking about stories, storytelling with data is again another skill which is extremely essential, and I believe it forms the backbone of a consulting or a product management professional. And that is also a basic frame concept that you need to know. And this slides will be shared with you, and within each of these slides, as you can see, everything is hyperlinked. I have put some free resources across the internet from which I actually gathered these insights, which I personally found really helpful. And I thought that these kind of explain the core concepts really well. That is across all the journeys, right? Skinny, athletic, buff. So these are my personal recommendations, or recommendations of other people as well on how they have actually learned a skill. And I've gone through those resources, filtered out, and I've collated it all for you. Then the next thing in the skinny journey is learning about basic statistics, right? So for example, you might be a developer, right? So I mean, picking up, let's say, a Python, if you already know an R, is not really a very difficult exercise for you. But if you don't understand basic statistics, then you will not really appreciate, for example, what exactly is a regression model, or how does it work, or right, things like that. So, and beyond, even before you come to the machine learning stage, right, there are certain basic things that you need to know. For example, central tendencies, right? What is a mean? What is a median? What is a mode? What is the difference between the three? When do you use what, right? What is standard deviation? Those sort of things. Then I've spoken extensively about correlation, what is correlation? It measures a linear relationship. What are the limitations of correlation? Correlation should not be confused with causation, all those core concepts, right? Then we talk about hypothesis testing, right? From a statistical point of view, this is the concept which is at the center of most of the traditional and non-traditional machine learning models, as well as in A/B testing frameworks, right? So hypothesis testing basically, like if I have to simplify it, it's kind of tells you that the result that you observed is not like what is the probability that the result that you observed out of an experiment is a fluke, right? And if you repeat those experiments hundreds and thousands of times, what is the probability that you will observe this result? So that is essentially what hypothesis testing is. So that is again a central concept of statistics, which everyone should probably have to brush up at this stage, right? When they're starting out. Similarly, what does distributions mean in statistics? What are the different kinds of distributions, binomials, non-binomials, etc.? Then, for example, survey designs, right? How do you design a survey, like top-down, bottom-up? I mean, where do you put in your filtering questions? Should it be towards the beginning? Should it be towards the end? Things like that. It kind of helps you in user research as well. Then we talk about sampling techniques. So sampling techniques basically help you decide, okay, how do I actually pick a particular sample to conduct an experiment? Should it be random? Should it be based on certain variables? What should be the minimum amount of sample size that I should have, given that I'm ready to, given that I'm ready to have like an X margin of error, what should be the minimum sample size? So that kind of learning can be gained by understanding sampling theory. And then the last thing is experiment design, right? If you understand hypothesis testing concepts first, then experiment design is just an outcome of it, just an application of a hypothesis testing, right? So, and the last thing that I'm going to cover in this space is learn how to query SQL, learn how to query data, right? And the basic way of querying data, which is uh, most common, is using SQL, and it depends on your product organization maturity. But yes, I mean, you might have to retrieve the data and not be dependent on your product analyst to fetch you the data so that you can get the insights. So yeah, it's definitely helpful to know how to query data via SQL, right? And like everything, like I was mentioning, is hyperlinked, right? And like a very good resource of learning SQL here is W3 Schools. I personally like really benefited from that one. So that kind of covers what you need to know when you are skinny, when you've just joined the gym and you're trying to build up and get a certain physique, right? And now that you've covered all of that, comes a version when you are not too buff, you're not skinny, you're very athletic, like you're lean and athletic physique. At this stage, what do you learn, right? At this stage, you should probably learn a data visualization tool. Tableau would be a great starting point. It's pretty intuitive, unless you really need to, go deep and basically be like create custom visualizations and things like that. It is actually a no code thing. You just need to know some sort of logics, aggregations, how to put what chart, level of expressions, and things like that. But yeah, essentially, it's not much of coding at this stage here. And it kind of tells you, it kind of allows you to quickly tell your story, right? So if you have the data, what kind of things that you can build on Tableau, like what kind of metrics or dashboard can you build on Tableau, so that you can take the data and convey your story or your learnings to, let's say, a broader group of people who are in the organization, right? The other functions. So that's about data visualization. Next, we talk about learning ML models, right? So very important thing to have here, specifically for data PMs, is a working knowledge of traditional ML models, right? So what is a supervised model versus what is an unsupervised model? When to use what, right? What are the limitations of each of these approaches, right? And then when we talk about each of these techniques, we can go deeper and talk about, okay, what is a classification technique versus, let's say, what is, let's say, a regression technique, right? And so it's very important to know when to use which ML model, what are the limitations of each of these, right? So once you know that at a very basic level and how the ML model functions, another important thing, depending on, your organization needs, might be to know forecasting techniques, right? So I mean, it's a topic in itself, right? It kind of helps you predict the future data based on past observations. There are multiple algorithms for it. There's a very good book which I personally found really useful. It's an open source book. I have put the link to that as well in this slide, right? So at this stage, you kind of know the frameworks, you know how to visualize data, you have a working knowledge of traditional ML models and their limitations. Then you can move on to, let's say, no code model building, right? So knowing theory is fine, but at this point, the only two things that you've practically done probably is getting to query data, which is SQL, and making a visualization, right? But now let's say that you have learned about the traditional ML models, you can actually use some no code tools to build one for yourself, right? And surprisingly, I mean, Excel actually, not many people use this functionality, but it allows you to build very basic models like regression. If you have like a very small data set, it really works well, no problems. I would say it's good enough to test your basic understanding of the basic theoretical understanding that you have of traditional ML models and put it into practice, right? There are a couple of other tools like NIME, Rapid Miner. NIME is again open source. These are kind of tools which allow you to test out your theoretical concepts on small data sets. Probably you can do that. I'll talk about where to get small data sets and things like that later, right? So yeah, so this is the stage where I also encourage to get a bit hands-on, have an experience of a no-code model building tool, right? And at this stage, you're pretty much athletic now. So what's the next step that you can take, right, to be above that? So here, what you can do is learn a product analytics tool and see how data is actually being used to generate insights or take decisions within a product specific context, right? Not like a non-product context. So here we can I kind of found this resource very useful when I was starting out with my product analytics journey. So there was a free certification available by Mixpanel. Mixpanel is a very popular product analytics tool. You can do the certification for free. They'll give you access to the product. They have data sets based on, and they'll teach you how to, analyze the data sets. And they also have a set of questions which you have to answer based on, your analysis of the data. So you learn by doing it on the tool itself. Right? So two things it helps you do, right? It first gives you a deeper understanding of how metrics are seen inside the product industry. And it also hones your sense of product metrics, like you understand things like conversion, retention, and so on with practical product data examples and using them hands-on on the tool. So the second point in this stage that I'm going to talk about is, for now that you've covered all of this, if you're feeling more adventurous, right, and so you might want to code and build ML models, right, and if you already have a coding background and if you have already covered the earlier two stages, it's not going to be really difficult. A lot of these things are all can work with very little code with machine learning libraries available already in Python. So I've put a link to a Coursera course which I found was very practical. It kind of touches upon the basics of traditional ML models as well, along with giving you practice on how to implement this in Python with data sets, right? So that can be the course of action at this stage that you can take up. The final thing is, if you're working in a more advanced, like I can call it an AI first company, you need to know have a working knowledge of deep learning, right? So what is exactly deep learning? How is it different from traditional ML models, right? What forms the basics of neural networks and things like that? So why am I stressing on this fact, right? Why do you need to know this? Is let's say I think a very common question at this point is, how much am I expected to know, right? And there is actually no right or wrong answer to this. It depends on three things as per my understanding. One is the company size that you're in. If it's a 10 people startup and you try to solve a problem and you're probably the only person who can look into this, you'll have to know as much as you can, right? And it also depends on what phase it is in, right? So is it in a pre-PMF stage? Has it attained PMF? Is it at scale, right? Depending on that, you might need to know varying degrees of these things. Then it also depends on the nature of the product, right? So if you are, let's say, working as a PM on Netflix's recommendation engine, then definitely you'll have to understand what like the basics of ML models and traditional and non-traditional ML models, because otherwise when you talk to your data scientists and your extended team who's actually building the product for you, it will feel like parcel tongue, right? So parcel tongue is basically taking a Harry Potter reference here. It's a language spoken by snakes, which probably only snakes and Slytherins understand, and none of the other people understand. So if you don't understand what your colleagues are saying or trying to do, then you are not in a very good position, or not in a great position to make a decision, right? And the third point, which is very important as well, is how much value do you want to add to the team, right? I mean, do you want your entire team to take decisions in silos without, understanding the crux of it, or you want to contribute to that decision making, have meaningful conversations with your product analysts and your data scientists and deliver a rocking product which kind of delivers the final impact to the customer, right? So these are the three things which kind of determine how much you are expected to know at this stage. Okay, So with that, I think if I can go to the next slide, I have just 3 suggestions here overall, right? One is Kaggle, right? Kaggle is a website which has a lot of data science competitions. It has a lot of open source data sets which you can use, explore data, just get some hands-on experience with it. Similarly, we have Analytics Vidya in India, which also has the same kind of things. It teaches you theoretical concepts as well as it has hackathons and contests and snippets of data with which you are required to solve, let's say, a real life problem, right? Let's say a prediction problem, things like that. So it teaches you theory and it actually nudges you to get hands-on with data. And with respect to visualizations or how to tell stories with data, the best inspiration that I've found so far, apart from reading books, is actually the Tableau gallery. They have an open source gallery where they publish visualizations of the day, which are the best visualizations of data which users from all across the globe have come up with. And I've really benefited at looking these kind of visualizations to understand that given the same data set, how can different people actually visualize this data in different manner and portray their stories and have different kinds of insights, even though they all started with the same kind of data, right? So that is definitely one good source of inspiration for you to get started on the visualization part of it. So yeah, with that, I think that's all I had for now. If there are time for questions, I'll take questions now, or we can probably move on.
Yeah, thank you, Shathik. So, guys, if you have questions for our speakers, you can, ask your questions. Um, and also, I have a few questions which I got in registration form. Maybe we can take those. A few, yeah. People are asking that can we get the deck of your presentation? So, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Priyanka. I think we could publish the text. Either we'll mail it to you, or we can share a link where the people can find these texts.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. So actually, I'm gonna read a few questions which I got in a registration form, if that's fine with you guys. By the way, we are very late, but we can take 1-2 questions maybe.
Sure, Priyanka.
Sure. Okay. So the first question that I have is, what to show on how to show a non-tech hiring manager for them to see how that you understand data, given that you don't know how to code.
Could you repeat that, Priyanka, if you don't mind?
Yeah, okay. How to show a non-tech hiring manager for them to see that you understand how data is collected or used, given that you don't do the coding. Yeah.
Is that for a specific person or?
Yeah, it's a person who is asking that,
No. It's addressed to which speaker is the question?
Like it's for all of you. Like
So let me take a shot at it, Priyanka,
Okay.
and then maybe we can
Sure.
build on top.
Okay.
I think if you do understand, right, even if you don't do the coding, if you understand, the ideal way to do it would be pick up a problem statement from your experience in the past and walk the person through it, right? And if the hiring manager is satisfied, or if you are able to articulate the problem statement well, you should then have a discussion that will help you deep dive into your past experience. I think if you have an in-depth understanding, that should not be a challenge. But follow the approach of picking up a problem statement, defining the problem, why you thought that was important, and kind of impact you were able to drive. And if it's a data-based problem, if you've taken certain decisions based on insights and data, Call that out, and that should help. Define the metrics that you looked at. Define if, let's say, the data did not exist. Define what you did to collect data. Was it subjective in terms of customer interviews? Did you do instrumentation? Did you run rapid experiments, low cost experiments to validate a hypothesis? I think, again, it really boils down to if you have enough understanding of what you're trying to showcase, having a structured approach starting from the problem should help. Um, um, Sharat, Ishan, Satvik, if you have anything to add, over to you guys.
I think that's very fairly put. To showcase your skill sets, it's very critical for you to talk about the four things. What is the situation or the problem statement you worked on, right? What was the scenario? What were the constraints, scope? What did you do, right? What was your plan? Why did you do it, right? What was the hypothesis, and what was the outcome, right? And how did you build? How did you measure? How did you what were the metrics? How did you define the metrics? So you should, if you have done something and if you're really good at understanding data, you should be able to define each and every step of the problem very exhaustively. And of course, your hiring manager might have some certain follow-up questions, right? And given that you have actually solved that problem, you should be in a position to answer. That's it from my side. Satvik and Sharat, you may want to add.
I think you folks have put it fairly well. Nothing more to add there.
Yep, kind of agree.
Okay, great. So I'm moving to the next question, which I have added in the chats. So somebody is asking, I'm looking forward to make a career switch from Oracle ERP to data side. What would be the path that needs to be taken?
Yeah, again, it's a very interesting, right? So two parts to it, right? One is data side is pretty general, right? Whether you want to get into data engineering, analytics, sciences, or data product management, right? Whatever the basic is like if you mean by working on Oracle ERP, you're stuck in the technology itself. The first thing is to go ahead and learn what is around, right? Or what does data do in product, right? How do you utilize data, etc. Right? That will probably give you the first step. Then, of course, I think Satvik, as I mentioned, quite a lot of useful resources as well as the process that you need to get into, like to build that muscle, right? I think if you follow some of those things, right, I think that should definitely help get into a space where you can start looking at moving into data, if whether it's data product management or even get into analytics, right? Which probably is a stepping stone sometimes to get into data product management or in general product management. So I think that would be my take.
Okay, yeah. So I'm reading the last question for the day. So it says, what action we should take to find out the reason of a sudden drop in metrics? Should I read out again? So it
No, we
says,
got it. I would like to take a shot at it, right? And maybe you guys can add Richard, Sharat, and Satvik, right? Firstly, to start with, I think this is a very typical PM interview question that, what will you do if you see there is a sudden drop in the metric? To start with, before jumping onto the solution, it's very important to understand what does that metric signify, right? What does it tell you? What is the business significance? Why is it even important, right? To start with. And then you, of course, go on and see the trend, whether there was a sudden drop or there has been a trend which went unnoticed, right? Then you try and correlate with any event which might have happened, right? Then you further drill it down and see whether it has dropped for a specific set of users or specific region or specific app version or specific page, right, where people are not able to use or do a particular action. Then you try to, basically the idea is to break down the problem to a point where you're able to, make some conclusion or get some conclusion out of it. That is how you approach a typical problem statement of, understanding metric drop. Rishad, Sharath, you guys want to add? Sarthik?
I think fairly put, Ishant, and I'll just add one thing. So it's not just a common interview question. On a day-to-day basis, product folks are expected to look at their metrics, right?
Exactly. Right.
The first thing that I come and do is all of the products that I look after, irrespective of how many PMs are already working on it. I look at my dashboard and see everything's fine or not. Right. That's how I start my day. Right. So metrics actually give you the health of your business. They give you health of your product line. And if you're not able to understand why a certain metric dropped, then you'll not be able to correct that. So it's better to be proactive. It's better to have alerting mechanisms. But in case those are not there, then as you rightly mentioned, right, you just break it down and try to isolate where the drop is coming from, and then try and solve that.
True.
So yeah, I think this was really well summarized. The only thing probably I would like to add, based on my personal experiences, a lot of people jump the gun on the exact definition of the metric. So it's also very important to understand what is the definition of the metric. So even if it's DAU, how Facebook defines DAU is very different from, let's say, how Spotify defines a DAU. So at the very first, it's important to clarify the definition of the metric. I mean, whether if it's an interview with the interviewer, or like if you're a product manager, like you have to have complete clarity on what that definition is.
Yeah, I think fairly elaborately expanded, right? And if you're looking for a specific technique, etc., right, you could always refer things like 5 eyes for you to get to the bottom of the thing, which is what Ishan said across. Like when you have to get to the actual reason for it, you could probably use a technique like 5 eyes to get to the bottom of it and actually know why the dip is happening, instead of like going over surface and trying to shoot in the dark, right?
Okay, great. So I think, guys, we should now wrap the session. We are already late. So I would like to thank all our speakers who took out time today and for conducting some insightful session for our community members and pragmatic leaders. And thank you everyone for joining on Saturday evening and staying till the very end. Um, I would like to know your feedback on the session. So I'm adding a link of a post. Please go like there, follow our speakers. All our speakers are tagged in the post, and let us know like what all topics you want us to cover in the future, and send across your feedbacks in the comments. For the next week, we have another session planned where we have invited some amazing women in product. So we'll send the invites for the same into your inboxes. So just keep an eye. Till then, have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining in. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.